The clink of wine glasses fell silent, as billionaire Charles Ashford leaned back in his Italian leather chair and called out, "Lena, bring your daughter over, let's have a little fun." 12-year-old Amaya, hands still damp from helping her mother in the kitchen, stepped timidly into the center of the luxurious Beverly Hills living room. The guests, all dressed in jewels and arrogance, smirked as Charles pointed toward the $250,000 Steinway grand piano. "Go ahead, play something. Maybe Happy Birthday?" What they didn't know was that for 8 years, Amaya had been waking up at 5 a.m. to practice on an old, out-of-tune piano in an abandoned church down the street. Her fingers, callous not just from chores but from scales and arpeggios, held a secret none of them could guess. As the room filled with quiet laughter, and Charles's daughter Olivia giggled while recording Amaya on her phone, the girl sat at the piano. She adjusted the bench with grace far beyond to her age. "May I choose the song?" she asked softly. "Sure," Charles smirked, already imagining a disaster. But then Amaya's fingers touched the keys, and the room shifted. The mocking turned into silence. Because what poured from that piano wasn't amateur fumbling, it was Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, played with haunting precision and soul. That night, the invisible maid's daughter wasn't just seen, she was unforgettable. She was meant to be humiliated. Instead, she played the truth. "Play something simple, sweetheart. Maybe Twinkle Twinkle Little Star." The room burst into laughter, glasses clinked, and Olivia Ashford's phone camera zoomed in with glee. 12-year-old Amaya stood frozen next to the glossy $250,000 Steinway, surrounded by the smirks and taunts of the Beverly Hills elite. She wasn't supposed to shine. She was supposed to be the maid's daughter, a silent, invisible background figure in their gilded Magians' world. Her mother Lena, watching anxiously from the kitchen doorway, knew what this moment meant. She also knew what it could cost them. Just moments before, billionaire Charles Ashford had called Amaya over in the middle of a cocktail party, interrupting his guests' idle conversation. Dressed in jewels and entitlement, they looked on, amused by the thought of a poor black girl fumbling over classical keys. What they didn't realize was that this was no random child. This was Lena Morales's daughter, the daughter of a woman who used to lead symphony halls in South America, before becoming just a maid in America. Amaya hadn't learned to play the piano in any grand institution. For the past 8 years, she'd practiced at dawn on an out-of-tune upright in an abandoned church 6 blocks away. Father Enrique, a retired Colombian pianist turned priest, had let her in every morning at 5 a.m., trading time at the keys for a little sweeping and cleaning. He saw what Charles Ashford did not, raw, aching brilliance. So when Charles smirked and gave her the floor, Amaya didn't panic. She sat down on the bench, adjusted it with quiet confidence, and placed her hands on the keys. The room expected a joke. They didn't know they were seconds away from witnessing something rare, something they'd remember for the rest of their lives. "May I choose the song?" Amaya asked, voice steady. Charles nodded, already chuckling. Olivia kept recording. Then came the first notes, soft, tender, haunting. Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. Not a beginner's piece. Not child's play. It was technically complex, emotionally layered, and nearly impossible for a young, self-taught pianist. Yet from the moment her fingers touched the keys, the air changed. Gone was the laughter. In its place, silence. A heavy, reverent kind of silence. Charles leaned forward, wine forgotten. Olivia stopped giggling. The guests turned to each other with puzzled expressions, then stared, wide-eyed, at the girl they had mocked minutes ago. This wasn't mere mimicry. Amaya played with precision, but also with heart. Her small hands moved across the keyboard like they belonged there, because they did. Every note carried the echo of sacrifice. Lena's whispered music theory lessons after late-night shifts. Worn out sheet music bought with their last few dollars. Hours of invisible practice fueled by stubborn hope and a dream no one believed in, except a mother and her daughter. In the doorway, Lena wept silently. She saw not just her daughter, but her own stolen identity. Reborn. 15 years earlier, Lena Morales had been the first violinist of the Maid Symphony Orchestra. But after fleeing violence in Colombia and immigrating to the U.S., her prestigious degrees meant nothing. She scrubbed toilets for people who couldn't read music but held power over her future. Still, she never stopped teaching. Never stopped hoping. And now, In front of the very people who'd overlooked them for so long, her daughter was playing her way out of the shadows. Just then, the front door opened. Dr. Elaine Patterson, one of the most respected music critics on the West Coast, stepped inside. A friend of Charles's, she'd arrived early for dinner and froze. Her ears caught the chart. Music first. Then her eyes registered the scene, a young black girl, playing Chopin on a Steinway with maturity and mastery that rivaled her conservatory students. Elaine didn't move. She didn't speak. She simply watched and listened. As a miracle unfolded. But Amaya wasn't done. As the final note of the nocturne faded, she paused. Then she looked directly at Charles Ashford and said calmly, "That was the warm-up." The room didn't breathe. "I'd like to play something I composed," she continued. "It's called Invisible." The piece that followed wasn't found in any classical canon. It was born of pain, pride, exhaustion, and a mother's unbreakable will. Its melody whispered of early mornings, cracked keys, and dreams too fragile to say out loud. It built into a storm-defiant, emotional, unforgettable. When the final crescendo faded into silence, no one dared speak. Elaine Patterson was the first to move. She stepped fully into the room, eyes moist, voice trembling. "Charles," she said, "do you know who that is?" He stammered. "My maid's daughter?" Elaine turned to Lena. "You're Lena Morales. You were first violinist of Med Symphony. You disappeared 15 years ago after winning the Latin Music Excellence Award." Lena lifted her chin. "It's an honor to see you again." The room spun. Charles sat in stunned silence, forced to face the fact that he had tried to humiliate a musical genius. And that genius had just rewritten every assumption in the room. Within days, Elaine's article "The Symphony of Invisibility" exploded across media platforms. Olivia's video, originally meant for mockery, went viral for all the right reasons. Amaya received a full scholarship to the Curtis Institute. Lena became assistant conductor at the Los Angeles Symphony Orchestra. And Charles? He watched from the shadows as everything he thought he understood was dismantled by a girl he had tried to make small. The moment the last note of Chopin's nocturne faded into the still air, the entire room sat frozen. 12-year-old Amaya Morales had just stunned a room full of billionaires into absolute silence. But as her hands lifted gently off the Steinway keys, there was no boastfulness in her eyes, only a calm, steady fire. She had much more to say. And it would not be through words. "That was the easy part," she said softly, her voice echoing through the chandelier-lit living room of the Ashford estate. "Now I'm going to play something I wrote. For you." The guests, millionaires, CEOs, and socialites blinked in disbelief. They had gathered that evening expecting expensive wine, catered food, and light entertainment from the help. What they got was a musical prodigy who had just exposed their condescension with a grace they couldn't understand. Amaya's fingers moved again, this time, not with the refined distance of Chopin, but with raw, lived experience. The melody that emerged was like a whisper in the wind. It began softly, like Lena's footsteps after midnight, when she returned from a 16-hour shift. The rhythm echoed the pulse of survival, a mother scrubbing floors for people who would never know her name, and a daughter quietly carrying both their dreams. The piece was called Invisible. And it wasn't just a song. It was a confession. A protest. A prayer. Charles Ashford, the billionaire who had demanded that Amaya play something simple just minutes earlier, shifted in his seat, the wine in his glass forgotten. This wasn't what he wanted. He'd expected to be amused by a poor girl fumbling with keys. Instead, he was being forced to feel something, and he didn't like it. But it was too late. Amaya's composition had gripped the room. Her music didn't just fill the space, it transformed it. The guests, many of whom had snickered earlier, were now leaning forward. Olivia Ashford, Charles's teenage daughter, who had been recording the entire thing for a TikTok mockery video, slowly lowered her phone. The mocking smile on her face had melted into something far more uncomfortable: recognition. She realized what she had captured wasn't a joke. It was history. Back in the doorway, Lena Morales wept in silence. Not from shame, but from release. Every note Amaya played told a story Lena had locked inside for years. Of being stripped of dignity, in the land where she had come to start anew. Of letting go of her beloved violin after fleeing Colombia. Of being seen only as the help, never as the artist she once was. But through Amaya, her story had not died, it had evolved. The melody deepened. Amaya's hands executed a run of chords so complex, so intricate, that even a trained ear would have struggled to keep up. But for her, it was second nature. This was not the work of a child tinkering with notes. This was a master in bloom. In the hallway, a whisper broke the silence. "My God," murmured Dr. Elaine Patterson, the music critic who had just entered moments before. "She composed this?" Charles turned to her, barely able to register what was happening. You know this girl?" Elaine didn't answer right away. Her eyes were locked on Lena. "Lena Morales," she finally said, her voice thick with disbelief. "You were first violinist of the Med Symphony. You vanished after winning the Latin Excellence Award." Lena stepped into the room, chin lifted, no longer hiding. "I became invisible," she said quietly. "But my daughter. She never had to be." Gasps followed. Some in the room recognized Lena's name. Others simply stared at Amaya, now playing with such intensity that her small frame swayed with the momentum of the sound. The final movement of Invisible pulled everything together, the sorrow, the rage, the hope. She interwove Latin American rhythms, jazz, harmonies, and classical precision into a sweeping, emotional storm. Every beat struck the listener not as music, but as memory. As reckoning. And when the last chord thundered through the room, not a soul moved. Then, slowly, reverently Elaine began to clap. "Extraordinary," she whispered. "Once in a generation." The applause grew, tentative at first, then overwhelming. But Amaya didn't bow. She didn't soak in the praise. She simply looked toward her mother, and the two locked eyes. No words were needed. They had just reclaimed something no money could buy. Dignity. The aftermath came fast. Elaine wrote a front-page feature for the Los Angeles Times, titled The Symphony of Invisibility, A Nation's Genius in Disguise. Olivia's video of the event, originally meant to humiliate, went viral for all the right reasons. The world saw a girl rising in real time from the margins into the spotlight. Hashtags like #invisible no more and #real talent not privilege flooded social media. Amaya was offered a full scholarship to the Curtis Institute of Music within days. Lena was invited to join the Los Angeles Symphony Orchestra as an assistant conductor. Record labels fought for the rights to Amaya's composition, Invisible. And Charles Ashford? His reputation collapsed. Business partners pulled out. His PR firm dropped him. His wife filed for divorce. And at Amaya's first official concert at Walt Disney Concert Hall, he sat alone in the back row, his seat not comped, not reserved, but purchased at full price like everyone else. He had tried to make Amaya into a footnote in his social performance. But she had become the headline. Because true greatness can't be staged, silenced, or bought. It must be heard. It was supposed to be a joke. A party stunt. Something to make the wealthy guests at the Makesals Ashford Mansion laugh between sips of $300 whiskey and gossip about offshore investments. But that night, in the golden glow of crystal chandeliers and polished marble floors, a 12-year-old black girl named Amaya Morales sat at a $250,000 Steinway grand piano and changed everything. Just an hour earlier, Amaya had been washing dishes in the kitchen while her mother, Lena, served canapes with a quiet, practiced grace. Neither of them belonged in the spotlight. Not in the eyes of Charles Ashford, the real estate tycoon who owned the mansion and employed Lena as his full-time housekeeper. "Play something simple, sweetheart," Charles had sneered, waving lazily toward the piano. "Maybe Happy Birthday. Let's give my guests a little show." His teenage daughter, Olivia, laughed while recording on her phone, her voice dripping with mockery. "This is going to be gold. A maid trying to play our Steinway. TikTok's gonna love this." But Amaya, even with her small shoulders tense and her hands still wet from scrubbing pans, walked to the piano with quiet determination. She didn't say much. She didn't have to. Because Amaya had been preparing for this moment for years. Every morning at 5 a.m., while the rich slept behind gated walls, she walked 6 blocks in the yem, cold to an old church, where Father Enrique, a retired pianist from Bogo, would let her into practice. The piano was cracked, the bench wobbly, and the keys chipped, but it was sacred to her. She had no lessons, no teacher beyond her mother and the aging priest, but she had something else. Relentless discipline, and a burning reason. Her mother, Lena Morales, had once been a musical prodigy herself. First violinist of the Med Symphony Orchestra. A recipient of the Latin Award for Musical Excellence. But after fleeing cartel, Violence in Colombia. She had arrived in America with nothing but a suitcase and a head full of dreams no one would honor. Her credentials were ignored. Her accent mocked. Her talent erased. So she traded her violin for cleaning supplies, and poured every ounce of her love into raising Amaya. And now, the daughter she had once taught to hold a note was about to play for an audience that expected failure. Amaya began with Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. Her hands floated over the keys, deliberate and light, shaping each note with a maturity that no child her age should possess. The first few guests still chuckled. Charles leaned back, sipping his wine. Olivia's phone was still rolling. But soon, the laughter stopped. It wasn't just good, it was powerful. Honest. Deep. There was something in Amaya's playing that made people listen, even if they didn't want to. Every rise and fall in the music carried something heavier than melody. It carried memory. Of her mother's tired eyes. Of whispered music theory after midnight. Of notes scribbled on napkins and practiced in silence, while others slept. And when the final chord of Chopin faded into silence, Amaya looked up, not with fear, but with resolve. That was the easy part, she said. Now I'll play something I wrote. The room collectively inhaled. She called it Invisible. The composition began like a quiet whisper. A lullaby of hardship. It painted a picture of lives. Lived in the background, cleaning up messes, staying silent, always looking down. But as it swelled, it spoke louder. The harmonies clashed with the elegance of classical form, layered. With jazz and Afro-Colombian rhythms, her mother used to hum while mopping floors. It was a masterpiece. But more than that, it was a confession. And the walls of the Ashford mansion walls that had never heard such truth shook with every note. Dr. Elaine Patterson, a world-renowned music critic and a late arrival to the party, stepped inside, just as Amaya launched into the second movement. She froze. In all her years, she had rarely heard such compositional maturity in someone so young, and never at a cocktail party. Surrounded by the ignorant elite. She looked at Lena. Then she looked again. Recognition lit up her face. Lena Morales, she whispered. From the Maid Symphony. Lena stepped into the room, no longer hiding in the shadows of class. Yes. She replied. That was me. The room erupted emotionally, not chaotically. People realized what they had just witnessed, a musical legacy that had been suppressed by circumstance, reborn through sheer will and generational love. Dr. Patterson clapped, visibly moved. Your daughter isn't just talented, she said. She's one of the greatest young composers I've ever heard. What followed was swift and seismic. Elaine published a front-page article titled, The Symphony of Invisibility. Olivia's mocking video went viral, not as a joke, but as a celebration of rising talent and justice. Hashtags like, Number Invisible No More, and Number from Maid to Maestro trended globally. Amaya was awarded a full scholarship to the prestigious Curtis Institute of Music. Lena received multiple offers to return to music, eventually accepting the position of assistant conductor at the Los Angeles Symphony Orchestra. Their new home in Pasadena was modest, but filled with warmth and a grand piano they owned outright from Amaya's first recording contract. As for Charles and Olivia, Charles lost millions in partnerships as public outrage spread. Olivia's social reputation crumbled as her video became a case study in prejudice and humiliation. And at Amaya's debut performance with the LA Philharmonic, they sat far in the back, not as honored guests, but as reminders that no amount of privilege can suppress real brilliance forever. When Amaya Morales finished playing Invisible, her original composition, the silence in the Ashford mansion was unlike anything it had ever known. It was not the awkward pause after a poor performance. It wasn't the hush of polite patience. It was the stillness of a truth finally heard, too loud to ignore, too pure to deny. 12 years old. The daughter of a maid. Black. Uninvited to the world of luxury surrounding her. And yet, that night, she owned the room. Just moments earlier, billionaire Charles Ashford had clapped his hands, wineglass in hand, and asked, Sweetheart, why don't you entertain us? Play something simple, maybe happy. Birthday? He thought it would be funny. A harmless humiliation. A child fumbling on the grand piano in front of CEOs, celebrities, and socialites. His daughter Olivia was already recording, gleefully, imagining the viral mockery. But what none of them knew was that Amaya had been practicing since she was 4. She had learned from her mother, Lena Morales, a former first violinist of the Maid Symphony. orchestra who, after fleeing Colombia's violence, had become invisible in America, her talents buried under a maid's uniform. Each morning, Amaya walked 6 blocks to an old church to play on a broken piano. Father Enrique, once a conservatory pianist himself, had opened the doors and his heart to her. He taught her technique, discipline, and courage. At night, after Lena returned from cleaning houses, she whispered music theory to her daughter at the kitchen table. Their home was small, but their dream was enormous. That night in Beverly Hills, surrounded by judgment and jewels, that dream finally spoke. Amaya's hands, still small but unwavering, had already stunned the room with a haunting Chopin nocturne. But when she announced she would perform her own piece, a murmur of confusion rippled through the guests. "You composed this?" Charles asked, half laughing. Amaya nodded. "It's called Invisible," she said. "It's about people you see every day, but never really look at." The melody began as a whisper. It carried the weight of Lena's footsteps at dawn, the sorrow in her voice when she thought no one was listening, and the fierce love in every gentle correction she offered Amaya's finger placements. The music rose, trembling with a painful beauty. Olivia stopped recording. Her hand fell into her lap, and for the first time, she realized she was not the main character in the room. No one was. Only Amaya and the music. The room began to shift. People who had laughed now leaned forward, expressions softening. Margaret Blackwell, wife of a shipping magnate, clutched her pearls, not in shock, but to hold something, anything, as the music struck nerves she didn't know existed. Dr. Elaine Patterson, the famed music critic who had arrived just moments earlier, stood frozen in the doorway. She had heard brilliance in concert halls from Paris to Prague. But this was something else. This was not merely performance. It was revelation. And then, Elaine saw Lena. Her breath caught in her throat. "Lena Morales." She whispered. You were first. Violinist in Maid." Lena, standing at the edge of the kitchen with tears on her cheeks, stepped into the room. Slowly. "I was," she said, voice steady. "I disappeared when I became a maid." Elaine was speechless. Not because of Lena's fall from grace, but because of what she and her daughter had risen to become. Amaya's piece soared into a final, complex movement. Her fingers flew across the keys with stunning precision. The rhythms now fused classical structure with Afro-Latin pulse, whispers of her heritage layered over the structure of European form. It was not only brilliant, it was revolutionary. When the final note fell into silence, no one clapped immediately. They simply sat, stunned, not knowing how to return to the shallow cocktail conversations they once found important. Then Elaine stepped forward and began to applaud, slow, strong, deliberate. "Extraordinary," she said. "Truly extraordinary." The room followed, one by one. But Amaya didn't smile. She didn't bow. She simply looked at her mother, and Lena walked to her daughter's side, with pride that could no longer be contained. Charles tried to recover. "Why didn't you ever tell us?" he asked Lena. She met his gaze. "Because people like you never ask." What happened next spread like wildfire. Elaine published a feature in the Los Angeles Times titled "The Symphony of Invisibility." Olivia's video intended to shame Amaya became the opposite. A global sensation that exposed how genius can live in the shadows, hidden by prejudice. Amaya received full scholarships from 3 of the nation's top conservatories. Lena was invited to conduct again, for the Los Angeles Youth Orchestra. They moved into a modest home in Pasadena, and bought a Steinway of their own, not borrowed, not gifted, but earned. Amaya's composition, Invisible, was recorded, broadcast, and studied. Critics called it a silent revolution in sound. A Grammy nomination followed. And more importantly, a movement began, one dedicated to finding overlooked talent in underserved communities. Meanwhile, the Ashfords crumbled. Charles lost millions in sponsorships. Olivia's online brand collapsed. Her followers, once eager to mimic her luxury, now saw her for what she had truly been, cruel and small. At Amaya's debut at Walt Disney Concert Hall, Charles watched from the back row alone, forgotten. Not because the world had made him invisible, but because he had made himself irrelevant. And when Amaya finished her final note, she looked up briefly, not in vengeance, but with quiet dignity. Because in the end, Invisible wasn't just a song. It was a story. And that story had already changed the world. 6 months had passed since 12-year-old Amaya Morales stunned the wealthy elite in the Camas Ashford mansion with a performance no one saw coming. That night, she had been called forward like a prop, a poor black girl invited to play a few piano notes for the amusement of billionaires. But instead of being humiliated, she rewrote the narrative note by breathtaking note. Now, the stage was hers. The Walt Disney Concert Hall in Los Angeles was packed to capacity. The curtains were about to rise on something the world had never seen before. A girl who had once cleaned floors now taking center stage as the youngest ever solo composer featured with the Los Angeles Philharmonic. And conducting the orchestra that evening? Her mother, Lina Morales. The same woman who had once scrubbed Charles Ashford's marble floors while hiding her, passed as the former first violinist of the Maid Symphony Orchestra. Tonight, nothing was hidden anymore. The journey from invisible to undeniable hadn't been smooth. It began with a video one, meant to humiliate Amaya, filmed by Olivia Ashford, Charles's daughter. She'd thought the footage would go viral as a joke, the maid's daughter fumbling at a $250,000 Steinway. Instead, it captured genius in its purest form. Amaya's original composition, Invisible, had silenced a room full of skeptics and awakened a society numb to quiet brilliance. Within 48 hours, the video had garnered over 15 million views. Headlines blazed across the internet. Young prodigy shocks Beverly Hills elites. Housekeeper's daughter delivers masterpiece live. Talent hidden by class. A new Mozart rises. But beneath the viral fame was a story far more profound, one of sacrifice, silence, and survival. For years, Lina had hidden her identity. Once celebrated in Colombia for her virtuosic violin performances, she had been forced to flee her country due to violence, leaving behind not just her career but her voice. In America, her degrees meant nothing. Her accent was mocked. So, she vanished into the background, raising her daughter with the discipline of a musician and the invisibility of a servant. But she never stopped teaching. She spent her meager salary buying second-hand sheet music. She whispered theory into Amaya's ears at night, showing her how to place her fingers in the dark, long after the mansion's lights had gone out. Every morning, Amaya rose at 5 a.m. to walk 6 blocks to a cracked piano in a quiet church, where Father Enrique let her practice in peace. And every day, mother and daughter built something sacred in secret. That sacred thing had exploded into the world the night Amaya performed Invisible, a composition born not just of musical skill, but of grief, pride, injustice, and hope. Now, on this night, in front of a national audience, they would perform it again. Only this time, the world was ready. As Lina stepped onto the conductor's podium, a hush fell over the concert hall. Her baton, raised, eyes steady, and for the first time in 15 years, she was no longer hiding behind someone else's shine. She was leading the orchestra, reclaiming a voice the world had once stolen from her. Amaya sat at the piano in a flowing white dress, her back straight, her fingers poised. And then it began. The first notes of Invisible drifted through the hall like a breeze through stained glass, fragile, but sacred. The melody danced with memory, every chord a reminder of footsteps on polished floors, of whispered lullabies behind closed doors. The orchestra followed, building in intensity. Lina guided them with precision, her hands speaking a language they had waited years to speak again. The audience, filled with critics, musicians, and admirers, was still. Among them sat Charles Ashford, once untouchable in Beverly Hills, now a shell of his former self. He'd lost millions in contracts after the scandal. His PR team had walked out. His wife had filed for divorce. And Olivia, once an online influencer, had checked herself into a rehabilitation clinic after her video backfired. Haunted not by Amaya's talent, but by her own cruelty. Charles watched from one of the cheapest seats, far from the power he once wielded. He had tried to use a child for entertainment, and now she had composed the music to his downfall. The final movement of Invisible soared, a blend of jazz, classical, and Afro-Colombian rhythms. It was both defiant and delicate. A statement. A celebration. A requiem for invisibility. When the last note faded, there was silence once again, but this time, it wasn't disbelief. It was reverence. Then came the standing ovation. Minutes of thunderous applause. Tears in the eyes of grown men. Lina stepped down from the podium, walking toward her daughter with open arms. They embraced as cameras flashed, not for fame, but for truth. That night, Invisible raised over $2 million in donations for a music fund designed to support underprivileged youth. The Morales Music Foundation was born, offering free instruments, lessons, and mentorship to kids across the country who had dreams bigger than their neighborhoods. In the years that followed, Amaya would be hailed as a generational composer, performing across Europe and the Americas. Lena would go on to lead the Los Angeles Youth Orchestra, dedicating her life to making sure no child with talent ever went unseen again. And Charles Ashford? He faded from the spotlight, a relic of a crumbling system. Because in the end, the true power of Invisible wasn't that it exposed cruelty. It's that it proved dignity doesn't need a stage to exist, it builds one. 12-year-old Amaya Morales was never meant to be the star. That night in Beverly Hills, she was just the maid's daughter called into the lavish living room as a joke, handed over to the grand piano like someone offering a toy to a child they didn't think could read music. Laughter filled the air. Her mother, Lena, watched from the kitchen door, hands trembling as guests smirked and mocked. But Amaya didn't flinch. She sat at the Steinway with quiet strength, the kind born from sacrifice, early mornings, and the silent lessons whispered after midnight by a mother who had once led symphonies and now scrubbed toilets. Her fingers found the keys not with fear, but with purpose. She didn't just play a song. She played their truth. The room turned still. Jaws dropped. And when she performed her original piece, Invisible, the music carried years of pain, love, and the fight to be seen. By the end, no one dared to speak. The same people who had laughed now stared speechless, changed, humbled. Because sometimes, the ones we overlook are the ones holding the most powerful gifts of all. True worth isn't defined by titles, wealth, or the clothes you wear. It's shaped by resilience, love, and the courage to shine when others expect you to stay silent. The world may try to ignore you, but if you stay ready, your moment will come. And when it does, make sure they never forget it. If this story touched your heart, leave us a comment below. What would your invisible sound like? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another story that proves dignity can't be silenced. Drop your thoughts and tag someone who needs to hear this.